Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Randy Patrick here. Another Housing Bubble 2.0 News of the Week video, or as I like to call it, another episode of As the Housing Market Turns. Lots of stuff going on as always. As I say, it just keeps picking up. The pace keeps picking up with respect to information and what's going on, and the changes are rapidly happening in the housing market. So today is February 1st, so the first February for Friday. It's kind of cool. We have warmed up a little bit here in my neck of the woods. I know the rest of the U.S. still is suffering from a little bit of a freeze, and it's kind of nasty out there. So hope everyone's doing well and staying warm. So let's talk about things today. So I guess you could say it's all about how you present the numbers, all right? And the big news of the week was that new home sales jumped 17% in November. So when you hear this, you go, oh, that's a nice increase. That sounds pretty interesting, and looks like things have sort of, rebounded and helped out builders and homeowners, etc. But, that's not really as encouraging as you may think it is. And the reason being, because what they don't state in the headlines, and they're not very clear about it, is that the 17% gain was a month-to-month gain. So it was a month-to-month gain from October to November, this past year, of 17%, and the fact that October numbers were horrendous. They were the lowest read in a year and a half. So when we have a 17% gain, we're actually coming from a loss from the previous month. So analysts who run these numbers show a much weaker data set for November and in December. And also, the report from the analysts are that these numbers have a really huge margin of error, plus or minus 20%. So, it's not quite what we think it is. And, further, I guess, negative information or negative numbers can fall out of this. So realize that 17% jump is a nice headline to, boost, stock prices, the economy, home builder, home buyer sentiment. But when it comes down to it, it's not really painting the correct picture. Now, to go along with that, there was a 12% drop in the median sales price of a new home in November. And that's kind of material. That's not a 2% or 3%, that's a 12% double-digit drop. It's a third month in a row of year-over-year declines, and the largest year-over-year decline in price drops really since the previous housing bubble, which is kind of interesting to note right here. Also, the supply and inventory of new homes are up. It surged 14% year-over-year in November, and we have roughly now a 6-month supply of new homes across the board. And, for what a lot of economists and real estate professionals, industry analysts state, they feel that six months of inventory is pretty much a balanced market. It's neither a seller's market or a buyer's market. It's kind of right in the middle there. So, it can deviate, plus or minus here, up and down, but really we're at 6 months now, which is a fairly average type of market condition for buyers and sellers with respect to inventory. Now, this information is produced jointly by the Census Bureau and by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, affectionately known to us all as HUD. So when you talk about the new home situations here, I think the trend is very clear. Earlier in the fall and the early winter of 2018, we saw home builders getting hurt with respect to earnings and potentials and things like that, and calling out their numbers on a going forward basis, their predictions. So they got their stock prices hurt, and obviously we knew that a lot of home builders were offering incentives and doing what they can just to move products. So basically the trend is pretty obviously clear right now. So let's keep that in mind. Pending home sales dropped in December. This is just normal existing home sales, so pending home sales, and they fell 2.2% in the month of December. That's 12 straight months of declines, and that's the lowest December reading since 2003. So that's pretty, and I could have written that down wrong, but I'll have to verify, but at least since the housing bubble housing crisis, there you go. So again, we're seeing, pendings are falling, and pendings essentially represent, contracts that have been placed, previously. So homes waiting to close. So their sales will kind of spin out as the next couple of months round through. Southern California, home sales plunged 20.3% in December. That's the lowest sales pace since 2007. It's the 5th consecutive month of declines. And apparently, according to the real estate pundits and knowledge bases out there, apparently home sales rise in Southern California in November and December, and they rise on average about 12%. So this really is an aberration with respect to the numbers. That's a pretty big swing. So if we're down 20% and the expectation is really going up 12%, that's a pretty big swing of what's going on in the marketplace there. So keep that in mind. Of course, when this happens, you see that inventory rose 22% year over year. Last month for LA County and Orange County saw a 30% increase year over year in inventory. And this is according to information supplied by Redfin. And last time sales were this low was around when the U.S. housing bubble burst. And that statement was according to CoreLogic. So what we see now are similarities. And I can go into 10 similarities of what happened in the last housing crisis and where we are today, but we're seeing them kind of unfold now. So we're seeing sales numbers, trends, volume, inventory, declines, etc. We're seeing these things happen once again. The Bay Area of California, home sales plunged 20% from the previous December, and it was the sharpest decline in home sales since the end of the last housing downturn. Again, that information or quote was from CoreLogic, so very interesting. And again, per Redfin, 1 in 4 people searching for a home in the Bay Area are actually looking to leave the Bay Area. So 25% are searching out of the Bay Area because they want to get out, which I find is interesting. And it makes sense when you have high home prices and people are getting priced in the market and you can have a 6-figure income and you still can't afford a house or one that you like in that area. You're gonna look elsewhere. You're gonna look to leave the location, whether that's out of the county, out of the region, or the state, who knows. But you're going to see more inventory coming on, and the buyer pool becoming less and less. Accordingly, San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, and Denver have the highest net outflow of people buying and selling. And I want to read you something here. This is from Realtor.com, and this was there was a Florida-based, I guess you could say, symposium, event, whatever, from the local real estate boards here. And this was an excerpt from some of the discussion. So this is from Realtor.com. It says, the question is no longer if the nation is in the throes of a housing slowdown, but rather how deep and wide it will wind up being and how much of a blow it will deliver to the American real estate market. The signs are becoming ever more troubling. The number of existing home sales has dropped to the lowest level in 3 years. Price growth has slowed precipitously, and some super pricey bellwether cities are actually seeing prices fall now. And that's what happens. We see New York, Manhattan area, we see Miami, we see Dallas, we see San Francisco Bay Area, we see LA. So when we see these markets, typically when they drop price, they're usually the leaders in the bigger changes that are coming down the pike. So the fact that home growth has slowed in 70% of the US's 200 largest housing markets has economists debating whether the housing slowdown is the canary in a coal mine, warning of economic woes to come. So what I take from this is interesting because last month, maybe the previous month, it was making excuses. Oh, there's nothing wrong here. It's a little bit of a correction, a little softness in the marketplace. So those are the words that are used. And again, it's for me, I always gauge the desperation or the future sentiment based on the type of language being used. So again, correction, bubbles, crashes, those are drastic and dramatic. Softness, equilibrium, balancing, to me those are, we're going through a small little adjustment and it'll correct itself in the next little while. Well, guess what? When you take a look at this, this is from Realtor.com, which really is quoting from the National Association of Realtors, 1.3 plus million members across the country, saying that we're seeing signs that this could go a lot deeper and a lot, as they say here, a lot wider and deeper into the American home housing market. So concerns are there, and it is what it is. You really can't get any more obvious than that. So that I find is interesting, and I think as the new year rolls in, as we're going to see some harsher critics, some deeper, darker, more dramatic vocabulary coming out, for lack of better words. And I think we'll start to see some stuff starting to crack a little bit more. So that's kind of what I'm seeing right here. But again, I think this is significant just because if you go back to the last housing crisis, I don't know how many people were involved in that. Obviously, we had the run up 2004, 5, and 6, peaking in 7, boom. The boom ends, it busts, it crashes, and we're in a crisis. Well, people were in the proverbial denial phase of the bubble at that point in time. And first of all, because we really no one really experienced that situation, at least from their memory, and so we didn't know how to work it. So most people were just denying or saying it's a adjustment to the marketplace. We'll come out of it. Well, we didn't come out of it, and we got a lot of people got hurt. 10 million plus people lost their homes to foreclosure, etc. So a lot of carnage happened back in the day. So I find this interesting because we are educated now. We have better information at our fingertips. We can see things, we can plot, we can go back in time, which I always say, we don't have crystal balls, but we can go back in time and look at the history that is starting to repeat itself right now. Now, on the flip side, which I think is interesting, ATTOM Data Solutions released this year's or 2018's home sales report. And again, the big news was home sellers. So if you sold your home in 2018, you realized an average home gain of $61,000 on your property. And that's a pretty good number. It's up from last year's number, which was $50,000. So that's a jump of $11,000 from year over year. And 2 years ago, the average gain was only $39,000. So here we're seeing 2 consecutive years of $11,000, gains, jump gains, I guess you could say, which I find is kind of interesting. And that, again, they found that the highest return on investments was found in the western states. Of course, San Jose and Las Vegas led the metros in home appreciation. Interesting, we kind of know that based on what's going on there. We also found that the home ownership tenure, so basically, the amount of time people are in their homes prior to selling, hit a new record with the fourth quarter of 2018. So that was 8.3 years, up from 8.1 years in the third quarter of 2018. So obviously, people were in their homes longer than average, and by doing so, they were able to realize better gains than previous years, which sort of makes sense. We've come off a significant price increase, value gain, peaking, at 11.6% or so, on the Case-Shiller home values when compared to the 2006-07 housing peak back in the day, almost a decade ago, or a little more than a decade ago, I guess you could say. So very interesting to see that. Now, I think we're there. So we've topped out. If I go back to a few videos from the fall and some of the comments from industry analysts and leaders, the marketplace is topped. A lot of people felt that the fall of 2017 was the number one sales time and sales opportunity to get your most value up. There's some peaking of different metro markets into early 2018, maybe early spring, and it's been it's plateaued and there's been some decline in values and what people are netting out of their properties since that point in time. I'd like to note though that the U.S. distressed housing market, so U.S. distressed sales dropped to an 11-year low across the board. So this is interesting because distressed sales are made up of bank-owned REOs. So REOs stand for real estate owned, which means the banks foreclosed on the properties and took them back into their inventory. That's what REO is, real estate owned. Also auction sales, so whether you're buying at the proverbial courthouse steps, a lot of the auctions nowadays are online, so people are buying them online electronically. That's part of the distressed sales. And of course, short sales and in short sales is where you're actually placing a contract with the homeowner, going through the process and having the lender deliver what's called a third-party approval to approve your purchase price. So those three sort of, I guess you could say, verticals make up the distressed home market. And those sales dropped 11% from a year ago. They accounted for 12.4% of all sales across the board for 2018. Different regions of the country will ebb and flow with values of how much of their overall sales mix were distressed sales. I can tell you right now that probably a lot more of those distressed sales happened earlier in the year and we're slowing down towards the end of the year. Now, again, an 11-year low makes sense because we've come off a peak. So the peak of, I guess you could say, distressed sales as a whole was in 2011, which is right in the housing crisis coming out of it, when 38.6% of the sales across the board in the U.S. were distressed sales, so almost 40%. So we've dropped a lot, but it makes sense because if values have slowly risen, or not slowly, but have risen since 2011 to here we are in 2018, you would assume that your equity play is coming back up. It gives more people opportunity to sell, to get out of that distress mode, etc. So it's just interesting to note that that's where it is today. Now, even though an overall decline was posted, that's on a broad-based national level. There are many locations across the U.S. where the distressed component of sales is actually up, and it's up quite a bit. So we're going to have pockets across the country. They could be, well, I know Florida is one of the main locations. Areas that have had natural disasters like wildfires, hurricanes, and floods. They're going to peak and surge with respect to the distress factor as well too. But other locations, like for example, New Jersey, Illinois, whatever. Every so often, I'll read different states sort of peak with respect to foreclosure filings or auctions or foreclosure activity. So it is quite interesting to see what goes on. And before we had what I call the 4 Sunbelt states, which were Florida, Nevada, Arizona, and California. That was your top 4 for foreclosure filings and foreclosure carnage. Now, I mean, clearly those states do have volume, but every so often we'll see maybe a new leader on the percent per capita basis. Sometimes it's Jersey, sometimes it's Delaware, sometimes it's New York, sometimes it's, it can be in Ohio, so it's, or Illinois. It just depends on what's going on in the marketplace, the ebbing and flowing of filings and what's going, and just timing of the year, I think, as well too. So it's very interesting. Now, again, this is where you get your number one hunk of equity. So a lot of people have done better in average on their equity gain if they were buying homes during that 2011, 12 era, because that's where the trough was. So if you're purchasing at the lowest point, obviously you've got the best opportunity to make your gain from then and there. And so the ones that are selling, that's typically what's happened, is that they were smart. Either they didn't sell and they held on through the housing crisis, or they bought and now they're realizing the gains right now. So this is what you should look into, is the fact that homes that are physically distressed, obviously you can get a discount and negotiate them for better pricing, and also financially distressed homes. A lot of times when we say, just think of the distressed market, you have in your mind a vision of a home that's falling apart, that needs a new roof, and the shutters are hanging off, and broken windows, and overgrown, and whatever, which is commonplace. But still, there's a lot of financially distressed homes, which means mortgage payments aren't being made, which provide other opportunity as we go forward. So that's what I'm just trying to get here. So again, rising locations across the country, and we're going to see this growth in more distressed properties as the year goes on. This is the precursor, right? If you sum it all up, we have slower new home sales. We have slower pending sales. We have price decreases. I forgot to mention here that across the board, this month it was reported that 15% of listings across the board had a price decrease. So you put your property on the market and you already have to drop it. So again, just signs that show that the economy is not maybe as strong as we think it is, or the buyers aren't convinced that they're ready to buy a home yet for whatever reason, and maybe they want to see prices come down into a better range. Maybe they want to see some stability with respect to the lending market and making sure interest rates aren't rising anymore, etc. So again, just one of those things that I think is interesting. And to me, this is the real sort of signs that the trends are happening and we're moving through this housing bubble, and we're now we've crested, we've plateaued, we're starting to come on the slide now. We're at the start of the slide as far as I'm concerned. So again, we're in this transition time, which I always talk about. It is, we're seeing some data. Data's not coming out fast enough yet. It's almost like we want it to happen. We're seeing it in slow motion, but trust me, it is starting to flow in the opposite direction. So for me, I'm convinced I know what the future holds. I don't know whether you're convinced at what the future holds. I do read the comments on the videos. I look at other videos and I see people who are commenting on my video, comment on other people's videos, and I understand what's going on. So it looks like it is interesting to read, but I see that the sentiment is spreading out there and things are changing. A lot of people believe that we are seeing a major correction right now in the marketplace. So there you go. So again, people who have reached out to me, I appreciate that, and I do my best to get back to you in a timely manner. So again, just want to say thank you. If you want to contact me directly on real estate in the local area here in Florida, or investing in nature, you can just hit me up on my email. So please send me an email directly and we'll get in contact with. So I'm always looking to connect with people. People already said they're coming down to Florida for either visits or snowbirds or relocation. So definitely feel free to look me up and we can see what we can do to help each other out. You can, again, email me directly. And as always, just want to thank you for the views, likes, and comments. I do appreciate them. Please subscribe if you feel that this channel has value and you enjoy the content of it. As I always keep saying, we'll talk more about some investing things as time goes on. I'm preparing a lot of that stuff right now. I want to make this a little more impactful for people, so I'm spending more time on it. And lots are going on, so just keep your nose and ears to the ground. Keep your eyes wide open, and never pay retail is what my new motto is going to be. So good luck with your house hunting or home projects, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next week.